How much of an impact can a great agile consultant have? I think they can have a huge impact because they're not, an agile consultant tends not to be interested in hanging around. That's the difference I feel between consulting and coaching. Like a coach is going to be there all the time, but a consultant, it can't be there all the time. Usually, one, because they're more expensive, right? So the company doesn't want them hanging around for too long. But really, the consultant is doing that deliberately, right? If the company wants you around full time, you're not expensive enough. Because you want to be coming in, helping them with very specific problems. They're the ones that are going to be fixing the problem. They're the ones that are going to be doing the work. You're giving them things to try, or perhaps what one of the things that I've done quite a lot with organizations is, I guess I call it the state of agile report, right? What is the current state of the way things work inside of the organization from the perspective of agile, and what are the things, like what are the top three things that the organization should focus on improving? So I'm not necessarily there to solve any of those problems, right? I maybe come in for a week or 2 weeks. I'm going to interview 20 or 30 people in the organization at all different levels, ask them questions about how they work, how they figure things out. And you get a lot of answers that are contradictory in that story, right? Because you get the people actually doing the work saying, yeah, we don't really write unit tests and we don't really have automated builds. But then you speak to leadership and they're like, yeah, we've got continuous delivery and we've got all these unit tests coming out of our ears, and maybe we've got too many unit tests. And there's a fundamental disconnect there, because leadership in organizations will often say, I've heard in my on my leadership grapevine that we should be doing unit tests, and then the teams feel under pressure to do unit tests, so they'll just tell them that they've done unit tests because maybe the product that they're working on is absolutely impossible to do unit tests, but it's not possible to have that conversation with leadership because there's not an open and transparent relationship going on there in the organization. So being able to find and identify those problems, figure out what it is that, and these are big things that need to change, not little things. They're not subtle things. Like, coaches come in and fix the subtle things and work on the bigger things over a longer period of time. But that often takes too long. I'm just going to put that out there. It takes too long. What you want to be able to do is go into an organization, see a switch on the wall that at the bottom it says not continuous delivery, at the top it says continuous delivery, and you want to figure out, how do I flip that switch? How do I just turn that on? How do I just fix this problem? And quite often, you're not always going to be right. And I always, when I go into organizations, I'm always explaining that, right? I'm saying, I'm going to give you things to try. They might not work for you. They maybe have worked in other places, but things to try. And they try them, and either it works for them or it doesn't, right? And then they can come back and say, well, we tried this and it didn't work, but it worked a little bit, right? So what else can we do to figure this out? And that's that consulting moment that I think coaches do as well, right? But this is just taking that piece off and saying, let's just do this piece. Because I feel that organizations and leaders in organizations, people in organizations need to own that problem themselves. They're the one, it's their organization, they're in the crap that they're in, they need to deal with figuring out how to get out. Because if you get somebody in who's given accountability for changing that problem but isn't really part of the company or doesn't really understand the company, it can be very difficult for them to affect change. And that's why it takes longer, because then they have to build all of those relationships before they can change. But quite often, when you come in as a consultant, you're not worried about being fired, right? That's the first thing, because you've got another gig next week and you're not coming back. You might not be coming back at all. So you can just be absolutely brutally honest in your reporting and say, this is what's going on in your organization. This is why it's broken. This is things you're going to need to fix. I recommend you go find a coach and help you fix this thing. But then they know that's what they need to fix. They have it in the front of their mind, and they're potentially they can see that switch in the wall, and they're like, if we could just flip that switch, and they're figuring out more things to do that. And I think that's why I think that great consultants can be more valuable than great coaches, because their focus is on flipping that switch as quickly as possible. And flipping things quickly, like ripping the Band-Aid off, right? You don't want to peel it slowly because that's going to hurt more. You want to just rip it off, do something different, and deal with the fallout of that bigger change. And I'm going to say, well, it depends, right? That's why you need a great consultant, because the great consultant is going to be able to go, yeah, you want to slow change that one and you want to fast change this one, right? Because if you slow change that one, it's going to be a problem, and if you fast change this one, it's going to be a problem. And that's things that people feel are unique to their organization, but they're really not. One of the things that I always find really interesting is every single consulting customer I've ever worked with has said, we have these magical, unique problems and we need your help with them. And I go in and their problems are not magical and they're not unique. They're the same problems that everybody else is having. There's little fine nuance of difference, right? But the big problem is the big problem that everybody's having. And part of that comes from Taylorism to volatility, right? So from traditional hierarchical industrial revolution thinking, focused on things, changing to democratized self-organization, distributed thinking focused on people, right? So those are one of the two big bridges that needs to happen in organizations. But there's lots of other things that are small that they can do within those structures that will enable them to do better, right? But you've still got those big problems that are the same everywhere, because everybody's trying to do this decentralized self-organizing teams, but they're in a hierarchy with steering and leadership and control from the top, and they're mutually exclusive, right? You can get a little bit of this inside of this, but you can't get all the way over here where people want to be, where they see the biggest benefit in what they're getting. So I feel that's the value of a consultant, is being able to come in and quickly identify and point at things that need to change. And a lot of these things are really obvious when you come in from the outside, but they're not obvious at all when you're inside of that story, and having somebody come in and do it. I'll point out also, quite often I come in and the sponsor for me coming in says, here's the things we'd like you to tell leadership, right? Because they already know what the problem is, just nobody's listening to them, and they need somebody else to come in and say, yes, this is indeed a problem that you've been told a whole bunch of times. And I'm only going to do that if those things are actually true, right? If I'm going to look and see. But it's really valuable to have somebody with knowledge and experience come in from the outside that's maybe recognized inside of the organization in that traditional hierarchy to help start making those changes across to the other side of the wall.